I really see entrepreneurs as, like I said, the dreamers that make things happen when the rest of the world thinks that they're crazy. They see alternative ways that things can be done and they're not afraid to try it. There is a pipeline issue for women in climate in the UK. Our job is really to ensure that we're providing a pathway for all entrepreneurs to know that they can have a seat at that table where they can create the world.
Welcome to Black Earth. Black Earth is an award-winning podcast celebrating Mother Nature and the incredible Black women in the environmental movement. I'm your host, Marion Atieno-Osieyo. Today's episode is one that I've been deeply looking forward to because I'm in conversation with Mandy Nyarko. Mandy is a visionary leader who is building pathways for women entrepreneurs and underrepresented founders, building scalable, high-impact and climate-focused businesses. I brought Mandy onto the podcast today because I wanted to give you an insight on what it means to combine your passion for sustainability, entrepreneurship, and inclusion. In our conversation today, Mandy and I will explore what it really means to be a climate and sustainability entrepreneur. We'll learn more about Mandy's journey and how she ended up being a global investor working on climate solutions. And last but not least, we'll talk about the realities of being a Black female entrepreneur and how we can get more capital, resources, and opportunities into Black women building businesses for our planet and our future. If you're dreaming of starting something new, this episode is for you. My first question to you, Mandy, is how would you describe your relationship with nature?
Oh, wow. Wow. What a question. What a question. I'd say an evolving love story. So I say that because growing up, I'd say that I had zero connection or awareness with nature at all. It didn't inform my daily routine. I wasn't dependent on it in any way, like to my knowledge anyhow. It was there, but it was not present in my world. Like I grew up very much so in a concrete jungle. Convenience stores was my drug, if you think about it. And natural capital really had no real presence or representation. So I'd say, for many different reasons, living in urban environments, typically you don't have to associate with the nature in the way in which I do now. Going to parks back then was probably the closest thing to it. And even that was like a nice to have. It was a nice to do for our parents, immigrant African parents, where you're looking at the rankings of priorities. It's not to hang out in the park for fresh air or better, cleaner air. Those were not conversations that were pretty much discussed. But then let's say fast forward 20 years plus, like I find myself working with entrepreneurs and startups who are building businesses purely for the environment. And then that changes my whole world, literally slaps me for six. I moved to Exeter, which is a total different experience. So you can really connect with nature living in the United Kingdom, but depending on which parts you live in, growing up in London, perhaps, you may not have the same experience as growing up in the Southwest, where nature informs a lot more of your daily mock-up. So in Exeter, even the experience of acquiring food is much more different. There are farms everywhere. Ships go out to sea all the time to get fresh fish. There's a whole area for that. It's like a normal thing. It's not like going to the Spitalfields, etc., to go and pick up meat, fish, or what have you. It's a totally different experience. And even just the interactions you have with the people in your family, it's a lot more outdoorsy than it is being at home or going to the movies and what have you. So yes, you have like your big four supermarkets, but typically you'd go to the farm, you'd see your produce there. You'd see how they, cut some fresh that morning, ready for you to. It's a whole different experience down at the coast. And then, of course, I'm Ghanaian by heritage, but first time I came to Ghana, I was 15. So again, growing up, I didn't have that connection to nature. But then fast forward now, I'm spending a lot more time in Ghana. I have my own allotment. It's like a mini farm. I'm harvesting cucumbers and, peppers, carrots, lettuce, radish, everything you can think of, which I've put in the ground myself and cultivated and grown, and now I'm harvesting. It's a whole different experience. And I'd say now, I call it a love story because now I'd say just my whole plant journey or growing journey, it's teaching me a lot about daily life, about when you put a seed in the ground and how sometimes the different ways it can flourish or doesn't always flourish, and who reaps in your harvest sometimes, and they might be there in the seeding days but not in the harvest. It's a whole thing. And so yeah, for me, nature, it's definitely an evolving love story. I think as I get older, I would be like knee deep into my relationship with nature, which was once never ever there.
That is so beautiful to share. An evolving love story. That's something that, yeah, just really warms my heart, Mandy. And I love how the closer we get to like physical contact with nature and with the earth, we really get to see like how earth is like a living ecosystem, living and breathing ecosystem with, you know, her own rules and principles and laws. And just, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
as you were saying, the value of a seed and what gets to grow, and sometimes things don't harvest. Those things can really be valuable lessons for us to learn in like our human lives. Um, so I'm excited. And I wonder, when you moved to Exeter, was that the pivot when you started to work with sustainability entrepreneurs, or was there something else that led you to this moment now where you're supporting entrepreneurs in the sustainability and climate space?
Yeah, I mean the role before, in fact, the two roles before, um, that I was doing, both supporting startups. One of them gave me like a very high level introduction into renewable energy. I had a startup that was doing something in that space in batteries. But then the role before, just before Exeter, I was supporting mainly businesses building physical things. So I led the UK's first hardware accelerator as a program manager. And pretty much I'd say 70% of the entrepreneurs on that program were building for the environment. So that was my real taster into, you know, what is happening in the world, different parts of the world, how it's affected us, where we are at today. And then moving to Exeter, I think for myself was just to deepen myself more so in that sector, in that space. And then just to understand, you know, a breadth. You know, Exeter was really forward thinking at that time. They were trying to be like number one leading city in, you know, net zero, and how they transitioned to that as an economy locally. And they'd formed a local government, and they had all these key stakeholders within the city who played a major role in how they generated energy and what have you. And so, you know, going in there to run that program for the city was really interesting, and really exciting. So that's where I'd say I deepened even more so. But the first kind of interaction was at the Hardware Accelerator, which is before it was called Central Research Laboratory, but now it's called Plus X.
Okay, amazing. So, Mandy, tell us about the work that you do now.
You know, when people ask me that question, I don't really know where to start. So I usually start somewhere
Yeah.
here where I say, I'm a change maker. That's like what I do. I drive change. I drive justice, where I see inequality, underrepresentation, and that's across all things from economic, environmental, and social sustainability. So I'm a change maker, but I'd say my instruments or vehicles that I use to drive that change are through investment and innovation. And that's kind of the two lenses that I focus this within. And I'd say actually maybe a third lens, which is like advocacy and thought leadership as well. But
Mm.
that's then led me to lead a business, or to start a business, build a business called Startup Discovery. And essentially, we build innovation programs working with private and public sector companies who are seeking to transition to the net zero economy, but have had an awakening to understand that the challenges around net zero are not just linear to environmental sustainability. They actually have a lot of social sustainability challenges surrounding it. And so it's important for you to take intersectionality into account when you're building these projects and these programs. And so, how do we basically really help them to understand the communities that they're based in? And how do we help them to understand how them building for the future can have a positive impact on those communities? So, our work has allowed us to focus on areas like gender parity, racial equity, climate justice, economic empowerment via the climate emergency. And we're now spanning across the UK. We have, which is our main headquarters, we have a branch or a division that's set up in Africa, based in Ghana, scaling across the West African corridor, soon to be East. And then we have a base in Asia, which is in Nepal at the moment. And so that's essentially kind of what we do from the innovation side. But on the investment side, that's also allowed me to move into, looking at these solutions, the challenges that they face, and funding being a major issue around that. And that's allowed me to make investments across both the UK and Africa through Future Impact Ventures, which is um, a UK micro fund, originally angel fund that we built out, but aligns and sits very closely to Startup Discovery UK. And through the programs, we invest in solutions that are coming through those programs. And Sahara Impact Ventures, which is a gender lens focused fund looking at investing in climate solutions that are tackling sectors that will be highly affected by climate change. So for that particular fund, we invest in Ghana and Nigeria as a secondary market. Our key sectors for focus are agriculture and food systems, renewable energy, and then increasing access to basic necessities such as health, educational support, and financial technology as well, because these are all sectors that would be further exacerbated when issues will be exacerbated during the climate emergency. So that's the kind of the work that we do. And that's the work that I do.
Wow, that is a big breath, Mandy. You're not only touching different aspects of I would say, like entrepreneurial ecosystems, like investing as well as helping startups, but you're also touching different geographies, right? And we'll get into the investing aspect of it because I think that's a key issue when really talking about opening up access to entrepreneurship, especially in this space. But I wanted to ask you, like, what does it mean to be like a climate or sustainability entrepreneur, right? Because typically when people think about, the image of who's taking action for, our planet, they don't think of entrepreneurship, right? They'll think of the activist, they'll think of the community organizer. Yeah. So what does it mean? You've mentioned that, you're helping businesses build towards a net zero transition, but what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, that's a great question. I think anyone or any entrepreneur that has seen a gap in the market maybe that they are in, that is tackling a problem that has been basically growing for a number of years but is now an emergency because of climate change. So Africa, for example, is a great case study around that when we look at things like post-harvest loss or lack of water irrigation. So some places in the north, closer to the Sahel, where it's drier in Africa, you struggle with being able to get the yield that you require because it doesn't rain enough during certain periods where it's supposed to rain. And so you have situations where farmers, where a lot of them are women in the value chain, are ending up with less yield than they forecasted or predicted that they would have because it didn't rain enough. Neither do they have the resources or the capital to invest in climate smart technologies that can help them with smart water irrigation solutions, etc. So these people who are creating solutions to address those massive matters are the ones that we call climate entrepreneurs. And sometimes they're community organizations that are from indigenous communities that understand the problem and actually know how they can fix the problem, find a solution to fix the issue. But the ones that we are looking to invest or put, deep capital behind are the ones that can actually scale that solution to the masses. And they're using technology as a vehicle to enable them to do that. And so there's, in this journey, there's many different routes to acquiring funding, but it's a knowing which funding route's appropriate for you. And we've decided to go for those that can, target a whole region of Africa as opposed to one small community or two. Because we want to see that mass impact. So that's probably like an example of an issue, the types of solutions that an entrepreneur could be tackling. And I guess the people behind it are the brave people, the dreamers that, want to take a chance.
That's such a refreshing perspective on what it means to be a climate entrepreneur, because as I've heard you say, we're living in a time where everything is impacted by climate change, right? So, for example, in the past, maybe in the agricultural systems across some of the regions you've mentioned in Africa did not experience a high level of loss post-harvest as they do now as a result of climate change. But now people are having to come up with solutions to be able to address that. That's a really refreshing perspective on being a climate entrepreneur that I haven't come across before. And I think it opens up a conversation as to who gets to be an entrepreneur in this space, right? Because, you know, you and I believe that communities who are being most affected by climate change and nature loss should be at the forefront of the solutions that we're developing. Do you see that happening in the entrepreneurship space? And how do we create an ecosystem for entrepreneurs where communities who are being most affected by climate change are the ones actually given access and support to develop these businesses?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the thesis that startup discovery was built upon. So during my time working in the various different organizations I mentioned to you earlier, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I saw entrepreneurship as not just, I think before I saw it as a vehicle for environmental change, I just saw it as a vehicle for social mobility and wealth creation. And people who weren't grown, who hadn't grown up or had the luxury of really wealthy people around them and having access to, you know, great expertise or mentorship, etc. I saw how entrepreneurship could be that for them. And so I wanted to give that to more people during my own kind of self-discovery, understanding myself, understanding this greatness that God had put inside of me, but didn't match my realities, and this internal tug of war of trying to break through, but not knowing how to, led me to understand how this could be. I know there are many people who have this feeling in the world, and this could be their chance to also demonstrate their greatness. But then after that, I started to realize that actually the communities that I was in, which was enabling these people to thrive, they typically weren't people that looked like myself, and they didn't come from my circumstances. They didn't carry my kind of baggage. And it was really difficult actually to see that every day I was going to work and, creating pathways for people who actually had a lot of supports just by way of how they looked, where they were raised, who their parents were, etc. Not everyone, but a few, a number. And so that kind of led me on to how do I provide the pathways through the businesses that we're building, the interventions that we're building to people who don't come from that kind of background, don't come from that kind of wealth, don't have access to the things and networks that these more fortunate individuals in society do. And that's what made us start Startup Discovery. And I think for me, our job is really to ensure that we're providing a pathway for all entrepreneurs to know that they can have a seat at that table where they can create the world. I really see entrepreneurs as, like I said, the dreamers that make things happen when the rest of the world thinks that they're crazy. They see alternative ways that things can be done, and they're not afraid to try it. I believe that they are actually one of the world's greatest assets in society. And so without that kind of pioneering support, a lot of lives wouldn't look the way it does right now without entrepreneurs. But our job is to make sure that the entrepreneurs that are getting to do that, dreaming and acting it out, are reflective of the global majority as opposed to just like one group. And that's why our organization exists, really just to balance that justice within who gets to recreate, not even recreate, who gets to create the world that we live in, who gets to, bring that perspective to the table, see that venture or that solution scale to the world. And at the moment, it is still looking the same way that it's done for many, many years. How do we empower and understand the current bottlenecks for those who don't seem to have that kind of access? How do we drive that change? And that's what we wake up every day to do.
That's brilliant. Mandy, you've spoken about really, really amazingly about access and enabling the opportunity for everyone to be an entrepreneur in the sustainability and climate space. I want to speak to you about Black women entrepreneurs, right? What is the data telling us about, Black women entrepreneurs in this space? What are some of the barriers they face in being able to access the opportunities and the resources that you've just mentioned, to be able to be not just business owners, but leaders in the solutions that we need?
We need a whole separate session for just that conversation, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I'll give you my take on it, because the data isn't vast. In all honesty, when it comes to anything gender, race for climate, gender is now picking up, but it's extremely slim. Extremely slim. There isn't loads of information out there talking about, how much capital goes to this person, that person, and it's changed over the years. I think in 2019 or 2020, generally, not climate lens, but Black women raised about 0.006%, or 0.06% of funding for VCs, right?
In
And
the UK?
that was globally, I believe.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely let's fact check that, but
Yeah.
it's either globally or definitely in the US. But it was poor. It was poor. It was below the 1% that Black founders were raising at the time. For climate, if I'm honest, it's a conversation that a colleague of mine, Samantha, we have a lot. The unfortunate thing is, I can honestly say that I believe that there is a pipeline issue for women in climate in the UK. So I want to be very specific. In the UK, there is definitely a problem in that sense. There are not enough women coming up the chain for us to see. If they are in any space, they're mainly in fashion tech. Yeah, they're not in renewable energy. You just see one or two dotted here and there, but it's not in abundance. I mean, I started a community in 2022 called Sustainable Women's Network, trying to find more of these women. And there aren't loads at all. In fact, the lowest two demographics were South Asian and Black women within the community. And I think that's for a number of many different reasons. I think that to build a climate business at the time, we're like climate 1.0, which is still heavy industry, it's still machinery and what have you. And that needs money, and who's going to fund your dear Black woman who is, maybe the first to go to university in her family, and, she's trying to create wealth. It's almost a selfish play for her to decide that she's now going to go and be an entrepreneur and spend the next 6 years raising grant capital when she's got siblings or parents, and, and our culture is different. We're expected to look after our community, and so there's that big cultural gap, in my opinion, that affects that. And there aren't enough funding vehicles for that sector at the time. I mean, climate, we're in our bag right now. 2017, 2016 to 2020, no one wanted to touch climate tech at all. So right now, it's great to see all the climate finance coming in, but it's still in a certain space. It's not deployed with intersectionality in mind. And where I'm seeing more of that happen is actually outside of the West and more in places like the global South, which is great to see. So I'd say there's many different reasons as to why that is the challenge. Again, just looking at personal experiences, a lot of our parents, I'm seeing loads of conversations online talking about, our parents raising us in fear and not in love because of what they went through. So they would push you to sectors and jobs that they felt were safe and what have you based on their experiences. I don't remember many people telling me my mum told me to go and be an engineer or this. Not many women, barely any men. And so I think all of those cultural issues as well feeds into why the pipeline looks like how it does now. And then the funding or the lack thereof, seeing what your life could look like if you took this trajectory. So the representation, I guess, don't forget, a lot of these industries are new industries. The role models are literally being built today. And a lot of people shift when they see representation. So if there isn't representation within that space, why would someone see themselves to want to continue doing more of? So I believe that there's lots of different challenges as to why the data looks like that, from knowledge, exposure, access, capital. And I think it really needs someone to go down the value chain and start working with young girls, really young girls from schools, to see themselves as innovators and to see the opportunities that can exist in this green and blue economy sectors. And then you need the funding vehicles that can also support them, to give them what we call space to innovate, you know? When you join an accelerator and it gives you 100K and you can spread that across 3 years, pay yourself a salary whilst building this thing, it gives you space to breathe, you know? But a lot of us don't come from space. We have to create space and create wealth and also work to live, you know, working capital, provide working capital for your day to day at the same time, which is unrealistic, you know? So there's no room for all of that. And that's why only few come through the net. And so that's what I think, you know, that's what I've observed. And that's what I think most of the challenges are culturally as well. There's still a lot of pressure for women from those two communities that I mentioned, South Asia, Black women, for marriage, you know? And so like, it's just that the priorities are quite different. That there's a lot of different factors. I've done research with young girls who are at Russell Group universities studying chemical engineering, asking them would they transition into this, and they're like, no. You know, but these are like great young girls on some amazing paths, but they don't, that's not a route that they are seeking to take or what have you. And so I think a lot of it is exposure. A lot of it is seeing that representation as well. So, but don't get it twisted. There are many Black women in the space of climate, but maybe not in entrepreneurship. Well, there are many Black women in the world who are in entrepreneurship around the world. There are many Black women in the space of climate. I mean, if you look at the company C for All, which is all around sustainable energy, it's led by a Black woman, and many Black women are in that organization. In politics and in the activist world, there are a number of Black people that, you know, we can reel off, you and I can both reel off, who are doing great things. But as entrepreneurs, we need more.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, Mandy. Wow, you took us to church. Like, you actually did. Where's the offering plate? Where's the offering plate? We have to offer. We have to offer. You know what? You've touched on some amazing points, Mandy. Yes, you and I both know incredible Black women in the sustainability and climate space, right? But it's from my experience, because the data, we don't even have the data like that. We don't have the large scale data to be able to dive into this. The spread is uneven, right? So many of us are community organizers. So many of us are small scale farmers. So many of us are activists, right? But where are the renewable energy, you know, Black women? Where are the circular fashion? Where are the Black women running environmental media companies, right? You know, who get to shape and tell stories, like real stories at a public scale about climate and nature loss. There is a shift. And I think sometimes maybe the access to entry is much higher for being an entrepreneur for the reasons that you've shared.
Yes, that's true.
And I think there's another point that you've raised about the type of mindset that's needed to be a climate entrepreneur. You know, this is a space that's constantly evolving, and it's very much future focused, and it requires being adaptive. It requires a high bandwidth for failure, like trying and trying again. And we were raised in communities where we were to seek safety and stability for the most part, right? And so that meant choosing careers and pathways that were more about, being stable, you know, as opposed to being someone who's going to push against the grain, who's going to try different things, who's going to think outside the box. And, you know, our parents, our grandparents had different reasonings and different worldviews. And now we're considering different worldviews, and that's why we're having this conversation right now, Mandy. So you've raised some really powerful points that I hadn't actually even considered myself as to why the numbers are the way they are when it comes to Black women, Black entrepreneurs in the climate and sustainability space. I wanted to ask you about investing, right?
Yeah.
We've mentioned capital is really key to unlocking opportunities. And I know that you're really passionate about inclusion, especially in this space. As an investor, how can investors use their role to really enable inclusion when it comes to the type of entrepreneurs that we have in the sustainability and climate space?
No, that's a great question. And I think I can speak for the impact investors. Impact investors, we invest, of course, to make a return, but we invest to make as equal as the return that we're looking for, an impact as well. And depending on what your theme for your fund is, or your investment vehicle is, that could be impact purely in a social sustainability capacity or an environmental sustainability capacity. So, an impact in poverty or economic empowerment or gender parity or what have you. And that comes out in the outcomes and outputs of job creation, percentage of women within a value chain being increased or what have you. And by the way in which we hold ourselves accountable to do that is through different frameworks. So I mentioned Sahara is a gender lens fund. So we focus mainly on a gender lens framework, as well as other wider impact metrics as well that matter to us around environmental sustainability, because we're also a climate fund. So we're looking at how many emissions can this potential portfolio company provide for the environment, etc., in reduction or mitigation or avoidance, sequestration, removal. How do we then look at how they've incorporated gender within their company, at the management team? It'd be great to see the business being co-founded by a woman with a really good, healthy stake within the company too. It'd be great if there was more representation across the C-suite team or within the employment base. And we use a framework that we used to kind of select businesses on that basis. And then, internally, we develop internal frameworks as well to support us to make sure that there's a deeper intentionality beyond cherry picking in that. And so I think that from an impact lens, most impact investors do that. And that's what keeps us basically accountable to our mission, some of our investors call it, what is the mission lock? How do you make sure you have and ensure you have mission lock? And I think these frameworks help us with that as well. So, that's kind of how it works for us.
All right, Mandy. I know our time is coming up. I wanted to ask you two more questions. I have so many questions to ask you, Mandy. What are some trends in the sustainability and climate space that you would love to see Black women entrepreneurs tap into in the next 5 years?
Energy, definitely renewable energy.
Okay.
Energy around the world, it's not just for Black women. Around the world, energy has a low representation of women. And so I really want to see women disrupting the energy sector. I would say definitely food systems across the entire value chain. Right now, you see a lot of Black women in the pharma community, so right at the beginning of the value chain, but I want to see them in the innovator seat as well. And then I'd love to see more Black women again in AI-informed climate solutions, but also waste management and circular economy. I think we do very well in waste management and in circular economy in that space for sure. But I'd like to see more of it. I'd like us to dominate it. And then definitely around the AI-informed climate solutions also.
Okay, amazing.
Thank you.
Mandy, what does joy look like for you in this season of your life? I'm really passionate about having more of us in this space experience joy, like true joy.
Wow. I was going to say my plants, but...
Yeah, 100.
My plants do bring me a lot of joy. I think joy for me in this season. Yeah, no, I think joy for me in this season really is achieving the impact outcomes that one has set out to do. Being okay with the pace, knowing that he who led me there shall make it come to pass in its due time, and being okay with that. And yeah, I just seeing the dial shift. It's possible. You just need to be consistent. We need to stay in the race. And then personally, just spending more time with nature, understanding the challenges and the journeys of the people that the communities I'm trying to affect through our capital, our programs, and what have you. So I think that's what joy looks like for me right now.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today in conversation with Mandy Nyarko. I would love to hear your thoughts on this episode, so leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube, or connect with us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok at Black Earth Podcast. If you found this episode valuable, I'd love for you to share it with one other person in your community. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. This episode and this season of Black Earth Podcast is made possible because I have an incredible team around me. So first and foremost, thank you to Kaz Watson, my impact producer. Thank you to Shanice DaCosta, our visual design artist. Thank you to my podcast production team. And thank you to Synchronicity Earth, our funding partner. Last but not least, thank you to you for giving me the most precious resource on this earth, time. See you soon.